So what would be your advice to someone who maybe has somewhat of an idea? Where should they start? What should they do?
I think that reading is really important.
So how did you get into writing plays?
Well, okay, let's take the first part of that sentence and say, how did I get into writing?
Ooh.
Okay. When I was in high school, I had my best friend who also loved to write. And when we would go over to each other's house for the weekend, we'd stay and we would write the whole time. And so I would write, Linda Bell, if you're watching, I would write a story with whatever guy she liked at that particular time, where she was the hero of the story, and like it all involved who that guy was and their adventures together. And it was like, we fill up a whole spiral notebook, and that's what we would do for the weekend. And then she would do that for me, and she would write one with whoever I liked at the time with me.
What was the name?
Oh, I always liked somebody different. So Gary, I liked you, and Ricky, I liked you, and Brian, I liked you.
That is
so there's a lot of them.
But that's how you kind of got into writing with your friends.
Yes, I loved it. Then it kind of spurred on for that. And when I was heavily involved with my church, I was looking for Christian plays, and I never could find anything that I felt like was not too cheesy. It's like I hate Christian drama that just wraps everything up with a bow and says, okay, they got saved, so life is perfect now.
Wow.
Because we all know that just because you have God in your life does not make your life perfect.
Amen.
Just because you pray for a part doesn't mean you're going to get it.
Yep.
You know, and because this is what my husband always used to tell the kids. He'd see these sports teams praying, and he'd say, well, that one's praying too. So does God love you more than he does them? I mean, he was being sarcastic, right? But it's a good lesson, right? We're all praying for something, and many times we're praying for opposite things. And so you have to trust that God wants what's best for you in your life. And I think that needs to be a realistic part of Christian drama.
Yeah, because I think Christians, we've done the happily ever after syndrome, but instead of happily ever after with a prince, it's happily ever after with Jesus, and you're like, he makes it better, but you're still going to go through it.
I said, well, what happens if I, write my own play? And so I did. And so the first thing I ever wrote was, can I remember the name of it? It was an Easter play at the cross, something like that. But the idea was it started at Christmas, but it ended at Easter. So my process is I get an idea for a story, and then I literally might think about it for a year. It's like I really think about it. Like, okay, for instance, the Philip Bliss story. So it's like if I wrote a story about Philip Bliss, who, by the way, is the man who wrote the words to It Is Well With My Soul. And it's a very famous story of, he wrote it after all of his children died in the sinking of a ship, and his wife arrived on shore alive, but they didn't. And so when he went to England to go meet them, he was standing on the spot where the boat went down, and these words came to him. So it's a very famous story. So hearing that story, I was like, well, what would I do? Like, where would it start? Does it start before his love story? Does it start after? What is his salvation story? What happens after that? And, and so you just start envisioning that. And then the next step after that is you start doing research. And so I read all the books that I can on the subject. And if there's movies out there, I might even watch the movies about there. And even if it's not the story that I want, I just want to fill my knowledge with everything that I can and somebody else's idea about Rahab. That's another story that I'm thinking about writing, and I want it to be, the name of it is going to be Rahab's Window. So I've been thinking about that for a few years.
Interesting.
And so I've been doing a lot of studying then about Rahab. And
do you write
stories.
anything down, or
Nope.
you're just thinking?
Just thinking.
Interesting.
So I have a hit list, and I write those down so I don't forget them. But
just the topic, like just
the
main,
topic.
Okay.
And then I have to figure out where I want to go with the story. And after I do research, sometimes I'm like, that might be too hard. I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. So then the next step after that, after I've done a lot of research about it, is then I take a timeline and say, okay, I know I want to start here, and I know I want to end here. What do I want to end? What What is that first act climax? Like, where do I want to end? What is one point in the theme of the story that we know we need to say, oh, yeah, we can do that. And then the conclusion can be in the second act. So I literally divide it, like get a whole, divide it, and then I do it again. Divide the first half and then divide the second half.
Interesting.
And then I aim on putting together the first half. And then, of course, you're getting your characters together. You try to think, okay, well, what's going to be different about this character? What do they look like in my mind? You know?
Ooh.
So, and then they like actually kind of talk to me, if that makes sense, you know? So, so a lot of times I will envision the whole scene and not write the whole dialogue in my head, but a lot of the dialogue, like, okay, does this person talk with a Southern accent? You know, what is it different about the quirky way they talk? You know, they use big words or whatever, and then do that for the first half of the first half, second half of the second half, you know, until you go all the way through. So, and then the part that's the hardest for me is the rewriting stage. It's like it's hard. This is difficult. So, because usually if I go back and start to rewrite, then I might rewrite the whole play.
You do the beginning, middle, and
Yes.
you think through your actors.
Yes.
You start actually putting together dialogue because you have those main points in
Right.
the beginning. Like, hey,
Right.
how am I going to get there?
Yes. And then you usually either start to let people read it and give you ideas about something that works or doesn't work, or just do a lot of rewriting yourself. When I give it to somebody, then I have to, I have to trust them that they're going to respond honestly, but also tenderly.
I was going to say,
with
what's the
me.
characteristics of
Yeah.
someone you'll let have
Yeah.
it? It's someone you trust.
Yeah.
That's not just going to be like,
Yeah.
I love it.
I've talked on the show a little bit about Tuesday morning with the tech that we did and everything. So the idea, I had a friend write me a reader's theater for competition from that book because I had read it. And after he wrote it, I was like, oh my gosh, I love this story. One day I'm going to write a play. And I mean, that was literally like 15 or 20 years ago, right? So the idea always was that I was going to ask Lisa Beamer for permission to use her book as a starting point, and thought about it for years that way. Well, then comes the research stage, right?
Yeah.
And so I ask her, and I can't ever get her to respond to me. I was working on the second half, but I got the first half to the place that I was ready for somebody to read it. And so I let Megan read it, and I had added these characters that were fictional in with the ones that were real. And she's like, I hate them. I was like, oh. So at that point is when I went back and added Lisa into the story as the real connector, because always in my brain it was Lisa Beamer that was always
taken
there.
her out
Yes.
and added fictional characters. And then who's Megan to you?
Megan Shear, who's a part of our advisory board. And so, and she's probably, of everybody around here, is the person that I've known the longest.
But because of that changed the entire show.
Yeah. And I think it was better. It
Incredible.
was 100% better with Lisa in it. It's the way I'd wanted it in the first place. I just had to do it differently. I had to not take it from her book, but I had to take it from factual things that I read about and I studied about.
And looking back now, Lisa Jefferson, who, if you know the story, Todd Beamer was on the plane. Lisa Jefferson took the call. The real Lisa Jefferson came and saw the show.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Can you imagine how different it would have been if
I had
Lisa
had all of
Beamer
that?
would have been it? She would have been like, well, that wasn't... I
Right.
didn't talk to Nancy, whatever.
Yeah,
like,
I know,
it went so
right?
different.
Right. It would have been 100% different. And hindsight, it also makes me wonder if, like, I had been able to get a hold of Lisa Jefferson, would there have been a way she could have gotten me in contact with Lisa Beamer? Like, would it have been different?
Yeah.
But again, that's one of those things. That's where I find that I have the most demons of insecurity, because there's a little bit of me that would have been like, well, I'm not good enough. There's all these other people that write, all these other people who do things, and I'm not published.
Which
I'm not
is
whatever.
so helpful to hear from you as a writer, and I think just everyone the idea of being vulnerable, because people would come and see your plays and be like, I love them and I think they're incredible. Other people who see your plays are like, this is insane, this is amazing. And you can even be vulnerable and be insecure about them, even though they're on stage, they're being produced by you with people who are giving so much of their time to act in them and to run them. But even that, you still can be like, well, I could do better kind of
Yeah.
thing. You know what I mean?
Well,
That's
yeah.
incredible.
Well, thank you. It's just honesty. It's like I really do feel that way, and I do feel like that there's special stories. Like I think you asked me one time what my favorite one was that I wrote,
Original,
and it's always really hard for me because at one point in my life I might be like, oh, and I think I even told you that I really liked The Secret of the Alabaster Jar. I think that's the one I told you, but I really think the one about my grandfather. I remember Pop. I mean, and I loved Songsmith. It's like they all tell a different story.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's something I don't know how people who write whole books do it. You know, I love the description in books. I love to read. So sometimes I just have to go read before I can write.
That's interesting. So what would be your advice to someone who maybe has somewhat of an idea? Where should they start? What should they do?
I think that reading is really important. And so
That's
if you don't read, make yourself read a book a month, because I
Ooh.
think that even if they're maybe start if you know you like mysteries and you know like you like a particular person, then read several of their books. But I think it's actually better to read a whole bunch of different books because you get different writing styles and you may learn something. Oh, like I don't really like the way they write. There's too much detail or not enough description in somebody else's. So I think that's important to read other people's works. Especially if you're a visionary, a visual person where you can imagine things where some people can't. And it's like, I don't know how to give advice to somebody who doesn't imagine things because I live out there somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the first thing to do. And then there are writing courses that you can take. I've never taken one. I'd probably be that much better if I did, but I've never taken one. And then there's also, and I know I talk about him all the time, but Ken Davenport, who is not a Christian, but is a Broadway producer, has an incredible story of like his father guiding him and where he got started. And his dream is to actually help other people get their plays produced. And so he offers a class of how to teach you how to get your play from beginning to the end and on the stage and produced.
Wow.
And so I would tell people to look into that. His organization is Ken Davenport. His blog that I subscribe to is The Producer's Perspective. And then the theater maker community is called The Theater Makers. And so you can join and get all kinds of different resources. And I think if somebody wants to really be serious and doesn't just want to write for a hobby, but really wants to be serious and even maybe make money off of it in the end, I would 100% say that's where you should start.
And we'll link all that information in the box below.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I love that. That's really good advice. I think that's a really good starting off point for someone who wants to get into writing.
Can I give you a little claim to fame?
Yes.
So they did little seminars for a conference they did, and they asked me to write something about writing Christian plays, and I got to do that and provide that on their seminar. So I felt like for my little 5 moments of fame that I mattered in the world.
100%.
So it was pretty exciting.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah. So yeah.
Wow.
There
how
you
much
are.
Fun.
Yeah.
So I hope you learned something about writing today and just the ideas that go on in Reba's head and how she gets it from her mind to the stage. If you have any questions about writing plays or want more info, let us know in the comment box below. But until next time, it's just me
And me
talking to you
from the wings.